The knocking wasn't at the door, it was on the walls, low, rhythmic, measured but not mechanical, not human. The way it came and went, the way it paused, just long enough for breath to get caught in the chest and refuse to leave, that's what made her blood turn to frost before the wind even touched her skin. That and the way it circled, not like a man, not like some drunken ranch hand pounding around looking for shelter in a storm. This moved differently, curious, testing, teeth behind it. Clara Klein didn't move, not even to check the lock, not even to press her hand over her daughter's mouth, though the child was already doing it herself, the way a bird tucks its head under wing and pretends the world vanished. Her boy, nestled behind her, barely breathed. She counted the knocks. 1, 2, silence. Then again, near the base of the dirt wall. The way her husband had packed it, years ago before the lung sickness got him, wasn't strong against fists or stones, but it was curved, sunk into earth, thick with mud and gravel. No one had believed in it when he first dug it, not even her. But tonight, with that sound moving from one side to the other like claws brushing against a casket, tonight it was the only thing between her children and the death waiting just beyond the howling drift. The storm outside had broken fences across the prairie. Snow stacked against the doors of better-built homes and froze their hinges shut. Wind punched holes through every barn wall in the region. But this place, this little cellar that John Klein had started as a potato hole and grown into something absurd, half underground and half delirium, was silent inside. No rattling wood, no icy drafts curling up through floorboards. The shelves of root vegetables held firm, the air stayed still. Even the candle she kept hidden behind a broken crate barely flickered. But the knocking didn't stop, and she knew what it was now. Not wind, not snow sloughing off the roof. She'd heard it before, the way it pressed itself against the quiet. Wolves, not one, a pack, starving ones, worse than the bold ones, the kind that learned to feel out walls and test hinges, the kind that didn't waste their voices howling at the moon when they could use their teeth against the desperate. Her fingers went tight around the iron fire poker, a ridiculous thing to defend your children with against the jaws of winter, but it was all she had, unless she wanted to light the last of the pine resin and burn what little she had left to cook with. Her rifle had been pawned, the traps she'd tried to set weeks ago got buried in the first real snow, and the dog, well, there'd been no bark in this house since the first week of November. Beside her, little Anna shivered once, just a whisper of movement, not from cold, but from the understanding that something waited beyond the dirt wall. Don't talk, Clara had told them when the knocking first began. Don't even whisper, they listen. She hadn't meant to say it in front of them like that, but it slipped out before she could stop herself, because she'd remembered. She'd remembered the story from 6 years ago. Not a mile from here, when they found bones scattered across a frozen chimney, and no prints nearby, only long drag marks in the snow. The woman in that cabin had lived alone too, but she didn't have a crazy husband who'd started digging dirt holes with a miner's obsession and refusing to build upward when everyone told him to. Clara used to mock him for it. Now she crouched in his foolish design with both her arms shielding the only warm bodies she had left. Another sound now, not from the wall, from above. Snow crunched, but slow, not falling, moving. It was walking the roof, the turf-covered hump that arched over their heads, hidden by packed drifts and brittle grass, groaned just slightly under the weight. Her heart stopped. If the wolves figured out this wasn't just a buried root cellar, if they caught the scent of something alive below, if they found the air vent at the back of the shelter and clawed it wide, Clara rose in silence. The children didn't speak. They watched her through wide eyes, still lit faintly by the low glow of the hidden candle. She moved toward the back of the space, past the jars of turnips, the threadbare blankets stretched over crates to make a curtain, the copper pot she'd used to boil snow into drinkable warmth. She stepped softly, never letting her boot heels scrape, and reached the small vent her husband had built into the rear wall. A clever thing at the time. It kept air flowing, let heat rise up the back so the frost didn't build on the roof too quick. Now it was a hole wolves could smell through. She reached it, pressed her gloved hand over the open slot, waited. Then she heard it again, sniffing, like breath pushed against frost. Not close, not yet, but near enough. She slid her hand down the back wall, fingers brushing past the candle's soot-marked tin. Her nails found the slab of flat stone John had left nearby for just this reason. She lifted it with both hands, heavy, gritty, stinking of ash, and pressed it hard into the vent slot. It didn't block it entirely, but it narrowed it, bought her time, maybe minutes. When she turned around, her son Samuel was standing, no more than 9, pale. One of his hands held a boot, the other pointed upward. There, a crack, not a wide one, a hairline in the ceiling. But dust came down through it, shaking dust. One of them was trying to dig. She crossed the room in 2 silent strides, snatched the boot from his hand, lowered him back down and held his face still. "Not yet," she whispered into his hair. "Not unless you hear it fall through." But not yet. The next hour passed like smoke through glass, the kind that presses against the skin even without scent. Time moved, but the fear made it slow, like syrup in a cold bottle. The knocks came back, at the walls, then silence, then another shift. Something landed above the vent, hard, then silence again, then sniffing. By the time the knocking stopped, Clara's legs had gone stiff from crouching. She waited another full hour in silence before she moved again. And even then, it was only to pull the blanket closer around her children and settle the poker within reach. They would not leave this shelter tonight. She would not risk opening the door, not even to check for prints. She knew better. They weren't gone. They were just testing, learning. She'd seen wolves do it before, in pairs sometimes, one distracting at the front while the others circled. And if this was a pack, a real one, the kind that knew desperation, then they weren't wandering, they were hunting. And if they were hungry enough to sniff out something beneath 5 feet of dirt and turf and snow, then nothing above ground would survive the week, especially not them. By the second morning, Clara knew they wouldn't make it to Sunday. The silence had returned, that terrible, aching silence that wasn't peace at all, just the hollow between breaths, a kind of pause the land took before cracking its jaw open. The wolves were still out there. She hadn't heard them since the digging on the roof, but she knew. You don't hear a pack like that when they're working. You feel them. She had once seen a cow, full-grown, branded, tethered near a creek, disappear overnight, with not a drop of blood left behind, just a hoof print half full of muddy snow and drag lines leading to the trees. What was out there now was worse than that. She stayed hunkered deep in the shelter, crouched low, her ears tuned to the soil, listening through her bones. Above the packed dirt roof, the winds hadn't let up, neither had the cold, but wolves didn't mind that. In fact, it made them bold. Desperation always did. The snows had come early that year and came hard. The prairie dogs vanished fast. Whatever deer remained had long since moved south, and the ranchers hadn't dared let their cattle graze since the first frost turned blood to slush before a knife could even drop the throat. She didn't bother lighting a fire that morning. The vent was still blocked, and she didn't trust the warmth not to rise through the roof and give them away. Instead, she took the last 3 boiled potatoes from the sack, cut them into halves, and mashed them against a pan with just enough melted snow to make them soft. She handed one to Samuel, one to Anna, and kept a cold half for herself. They didn't complain, not even Anna, who was usually the first to cry when things were plain. But this wasn't about taste. It was about survival. The kind of survival that turned soft folk into bones. The kind that built cabins like this, underground, half forgotten, dismissed by neighbors and mocked by travelers who never stayed long enough to understand what happened when the wind came down from the ridgeline and the real cold began. They'd called John mad when he dug past the frost line. Cabins are meant to rise, they told him. What fool builds into the dirt like a badger? The kind who wanted to stay alive, that's who. Still, she'd fought him over it. At first, she wanted a real home, a tall one, with glass panes, and a roof tall enough for a chimney to catch light without smoke curling back down. But he wouldn't have it. He was a miner once, back before the war stole his lungs, and when his body failed, his hands kept working, digging, stacking, layering, first a hole, then a passage, then a curve along the back, then stone and mud, then another layer. Soon it was a little oval room in the earth, dry as any attic and warmer than a hearth, but shaped like a grain silo turned sideways and buried. And once the children came, he packed it thicker, made the entrance low and narrow, covered it with turf and snow, and wood slabs scavenged from a stagecoach crash 2 counties over. When he died, she tried to move back to town, but no one wanted a widow with 2 half-grown mouths and nothing but blankets and sorrow to trade. So she came back to the hole in the ground, and it held, even now, especially now. But food didn't. 3 days. That's how much she had left. 3 days of thin rations, and even that was pushing it. The dried beans had mold. The pickled turnips were too sour to keep down. The last of the snowmelt had to be boiled 3 times to clear the soot. Her belly burned and her hands shook from the hunger, but she didn't let the children see it. She smiled, even when her lips cracked and her teeth stung from the cold. Because mothers don't get to panic, they get to plan. And Clara had one. Not a good one, not even a finished one, but it was all she had. They couldn't stay, not longer than 2 more days. The wolves might grow bored, might move on, but hunger was a harder master than curiosity. They'd stay near, Watch, wait. She'd seen it before in the woods. A stag surrounded by 4 shadows for hours before one of them made the mistake of getting too close. The others waited, perfectly still, because they knew they didn't need to rush. The prey always gave in, and the prey here wasn't a stag. It was her children, half-starved and hidden, so she did something foolish. She opened the hatch, just a crack. Snow spilled in like smoke. The wind howled through the gap, and she slammed it shut again before the children could scream. But she'd seen what she needed to see. Tracks, not fresh ones, but old enough to be legible, and too many for comfort. Not just a couple wolves, a whole pack. 7, maybe more, heavy ones too, bigger than average. She saw the drag of claws, saw how deep the prints had sunk even in packed snow, the way they circled the roof, lingered near the vent, then vanished, but not far. She closed the hatch and waited. Another 2 hours, then opened it again. This time no fresh snow, no new marks, still no comfort. But there was a gap, a window, and if she was going to do anything, it had to be now. She set Samuel to watch the back wall, poker in hand, told Anna to stay silent, wrapped in both blankets. Then she took the bucket and slipped through the hatch, low to the ground, face in the wind. The snow stung like knives. Every breath seared her lungs, and her boots stuck to the ice like tar. But she moved fast, 5 paces to the south, then 10 to the east, not far, just to the tree line. There, half frozen beneath a ridge, was what she'd left behind in September, an old root pit John had dug when the ground was still soft. She'd forgotten it, covered it with a tarp and brush, but now it was the only place to store bait. She reached in, pulled free what she'd hoped never to use, a single salted ham, half eaten by mice. It smelled of rot, but wolves didn't care. She cut off a chunk with her skinning knife, tossed it in the bucket, and slipped back into the shelter. It took an hour for the smell to start seeping, and another 3 before they came. She didn't hear them approach. Not this time, but Samuel saw the shadow pass the vent, just once, then another, then silence again. Then the dragging started. She had poured a trail, thin but steady, from the root pit to the other side of the ridge, a straight line of scent, nothing fresh, nothing warm, but enough to confuse them, make them wonder if she'd fled, lure them away. They followed it. At least 3 did. The prince told her that much later, but she wasn't watching then. She was already pulling the children close, preparing for what came next, because baiting wolves was one thing, escaping them was another, and that was the true heart of John Klein's madness. The tunnel. Clara waited until nightfall, then waited longer, until both children had cried themselves dry, then slept again, until her knuckles were white on the fire poker, and her teeth ached from clenching. Then she opened the trapdoor again, and this time she lifted the old plank beneath the floor. The tunnel mouth waited. It wasn't wide, barely a crawl space, but it led away, down, not up, then sideways, then upward again. John had built it when the fevers got bad in '67, said if the Sioux came, or if sickness rolled in, they needed a second way out. Clara thought he was paranoid. Now she thanked God for it. She woke Samuel first, then Anna. She bundled them in every scrap of cloth and fur she had left, pressed a strip of cured leather into each of their mouths, and whispered one word, quiet. Then she climbed into the hole, feet first, fire poker across her lap, and disappeared into the dark. The crawl was slow, painful. Her hips scraped the dirt. Her breath clouded the air ahead of her. Behind, the children followed, one hand always on the other's foot. The walls pressed in. Rocks jabbed her sides. Once, her knee hit a root and sent a crack up her thigh so sharp she nearly gasped aloud. But she didn't stop, because above them now, the snow had fallen again, and the wolves would come back, and if they found the shelter empty, they'd start hunting the trail again, and they'd find the tunnel eventually, unless she blocked it. The exit opened beneath a thicket not far from the ridge, a shallow dip in the land, invisible from the distance. She clawed her way free, then pulled both children out after her, one at a time. The sky was black with cloud. The moon hung behind haze, and the wind had finally gone still, too still. She looked back once, then she shoved a slab of stone into the tunnel mouth, packed snow around it, and stamped it flat. It wouldn't hold forever, but it would buy them a night, maybe 2. And that's all they needed now, just 2, because down in the valley, far off but reachable, was a trapper's cabin she'd helped patch last spring. If she could find it, they might yet survive. Clara didn't let herself look back a second time, not once, not even when the snow crunched behind them in a way that didn't sound like wind or drift settling, not even when Anna whimpered and clutched her coat sleeve so tight it went numb. She moved, not fast, not loud, just steady, with her body low, knees bent, boots soft in the snow. The kind of movement you learn after death has circled your home for 2 nights, and still hasn't broken through. The kind of movement that isn't brave or foolish, but simply necessary. The wind had shifted. That was the only reason she'd dared leave the shelter. If it had stayed coming from the west, the scent would have blown back toward the tunnel entrance. But now it had turned south, which meant it was cutting across the ridge and pushing their trail away from where the wolves had last circled. It bought them time, not much, but enough. Enough to put distance between the digged-out shelter and the new hope, a hunting shack she'd passed once with John 2 winters ago. It had been barely standing then, missing a full half its roof, used mostly by whiskey-soaked trappers during squirrel season. But if even part of it still stood now, it was their only chance. They moved in short bursts, 30 paces, then freeze, listen, check the wind, repeat. The children followed her silently, too tired to argue, too afraid to lag behind. Samuel held a broken axe handle she'd stuffed into his coat in case something came too close. Anna kept her hand around the frayed leather loop of Clara's belt. There were no tears now. The cold had frozen the ducks dry. Their noses were raw, and Anna's lip had split again where it had already cracked the night before. Still, no one spoke. They knew better. Clara had told them stories growing up, of ghosts in the woods, of voices that mimicked crying to draw wanderers off trails. But the worst ones, the ones that made Samuel hide his face and Anna beg to skip bedtime, were about wolves, not the howling kind, but the watching kind. The ones that waited, the ones that didn't make a sound, not even when their paws landed inches behind your boots. The kind you don't even know are there until you step somewhere soft and your body doesn't fall the way it should. Those were the ones out here now. She could feel it. By dawn, the horizon only turned from black to gray. No sun, no blue. Just a faint thinning of the night that let her spot the distant tree line she'd aimed for. And that was when she saw it. Not the shack, not yet, but something worse. Tracks, fresh ones, cutting straight across theirs. From the north, deeper than any wolf Clara had seen. Widespread, heavy tread, straight line pacing. Not panicked, not aimless, just purposeful. She dropped low, grabbed both children down with her. She studied them. Then she exhaled once, long, shaky. These weren't wolves. They were boots. Someone else had passed this way, maybe an hour before. 2 at most. Heavy-set man, she guessed. Maybe 2, or a man with a pack. No horse. The spacing was too close, but the weight was off. It wasn't staggered like a trapper hauling gear. It was dragging, just a little. She followed it with her eyes until the trail vanished over a ridge. Then she turned to her own children. "Stay low. Stay behind me. Don't speak unless I stop." Samuel nodded. Anna didn't, just pressed her face into Clara's hip. The tracks didn't feel right. Not wrong in the way wolves felt wrong, but wrong like rot under bark. Something about them itched behind her ribs, but she didn't have the luxury of choosing clean trails anymore. If they led to the shack, it was the only shelter for miles. They followed. The wind picked up again near the ridge. No snow fell, but the gusts were colder now, meaner. They cut through coats like hot knives and left your fingers stiff even inside gloves. Anna stumbled once. Clara caught her. Samuel's lips were starting to turn a pale shade of grey, but he kept moving without complaint. And then, at last, they saw it. Just a shape at first. Lumpy, slumped, bowed on one side, rising crookedly out of the white. A square outline of cabin wall, half covered in snow, with a roof that looked more tarp than timber. A broken stovepipe stuck out one end like a bent finger, and a split shutter dangled loose on the front, but it was standing. Clara almost cried from the sight. They approached from the downwind side, crouched, careful. The tracks went straight to the door, then vanished. No return trail. She waited, listened, nothing. Then she knocked once, soft, with the axe handle. No answer. She pulled the door open. The stench hit first. Meat, old sour, not rot, not yet, but close, mixed with smoke and something else. Sweat, the sharp, acrid stink of unwashed wool and blood. The shack was dark, no fire, but there was warmth, just enough to make the stink rise. And in the corner, a figure sat on a crate, hunched forward, long coat hanging like rags over the knees. Clara raised the poker. The figure didn't move. "Hello," she said, barely more than a whisper. Still nothing. She stepped in. The floor creaked. The figure turned slightly. Not enough to show a face, just enough for her to see the shotgun laid across its lap. But the hands on it weren't gripping. They were frozen. Clara moved slowly, circled around the far side. The man was dead, frozen from the feet up, ice in his beard, face pale, lips cracked, a bullet wound in his side. Low, near the hip, but not fresh, not bleeding. He'd probably died last night, maybe even sat there a whole day, waiting to see if the pain would stop before the cold took him. The children stepped in behind her. Clara caught them just in time and pushed them back. "Outside, behind the wall. Stay close. Don't look." They obeyed. She lowered the poker, stepped toward the body. A pack lay open nearby. Inside, jerky frozen flat, matches, a wool blanket, 3 cartridges, a flask. No name on anything, no signs of who he was. Just a man, just another one who hadn't made it. She took the blanket, the matches, and the flask, closed the pack again, folded his coat over the wound, not out of respect, out of necessity. If a wolf saw blood in here, it wouldn't hesitate. By midday, she had the stove going. Low, no pipe, so the smoke had to bleed through cracks in the tarp roof. Risky, but she stuffed the gaps with snow and left the front window cracked to draw the worst of it out. She got the children inside, let them eat, and then they slept, all 3 for the first time in 2 days. It should have been safe, but it wasn't. That night they came. She didn't hear them at first, but when she woke to Samuel shaking her arm, there was already breath fogging on the outside of the window pane. And eyes, too many eyes, low to the ground, wide apart, glowing faintly where the moonlight hit them through the trees. They'd followed, somehow, even with the trail broken, even with the tunnel buried and the bait laid out. They had found them again, but not all of them. Clara counted 5. That meant 2, maybe more, were still circling. The back wall was the weak point. It was made of planks, stacked loose. If one got bold enough to charge, she looked at the stove, then at the flask, then at the snow-cracked window. She had one option left, and it would only work once. She knelt, pulled the matches from her pocket, soaked the edge of her skirt in the flask, whiskey, foul stuff, stinking of bootleg moonshine, then tore it and wrapped it around the end of the axe handle. She lit it. Fire roared to life. A poor torch, but it'd do. She threw open the door. The wolves flinched, only for a moment. Then one, grey, tall, with a scar across its muzzle, stepped forward. She screamed. Not a word, not a cry, just a raw, throat-ripping scream that shattered the silence like a tree cracking in winter. Then she ran at them, torch raised. They backed off, slightly, enough for her to lunge forward, swing the torch in a wide arc. One turned, 2 more followed, but the scarred one held. It stepped closer, then lunged. Clara swung hard. The fire caught its fur, just the edge, but enough to make it yelp and roll. She used the moment to slam the door shut again, bolted it, then ran to the back. The wall was already shaking. Something was digging. No more than seconds left. She grabbed the crates, stacked them, rolled the body of the dead man against the boards. Every ounce of weight mattered. The children watched in silence. Samuel clutched the poker again. Anna was white with fear. Then the shaking stopped. No howl, no growl, just silence. She waited. An hour, 2, and then a sound. Not claws, not breath, but bells, far off, faint, jingling, then, unmistakably, hooves. Someone was coming. The bells were not kind. They didn't ring like salvation, or jingle like sleighs gliding across soft snow in a Christmas tale. These were dull, cold, distant things, the kind that hung from the necks of pack horses, half buried in drifts or wagons groaning under winter weight. They came with groans and creaks and the crunch of hooves too stubborn to quit. And in the coldest hours before dawn, they moved like ghosts, slow, steady, reluctant, but they moved. Clara didn't believe they were real at first. She sat huddled behind the braced wall of the broken cabin, both children pressed against her, the fire dead to avoid smoke, and the torch long burnt out. The sound was faint. A mistake, she thought, a ringing in her head. Bells don't ride out this far. No one comes this deep during a freeze, and certainly not when wolves still circled. But then Samuel stirred. "Mama," he whispered, voice hoarse. "Is that a horse?" Clara didn't answer. She rose, slow, stiff as the corpse she'd covered with a tarp in the corner. Her legs burned. Her shoulders cracked. Her arms had gone so numb from clenching the poker for hours she could barely lift it. She reached the front window, pressed her eye to the gap. Nothing but blackness. Then movement. A lantern, swinging low, carried by someone on foot. Behind them, the silhouette of a horse. Another figure trudging beside it. Then another. Shapes in cloaks, covered in snow. Clara didn't think. She unbolted the door, flung it open, and nearly stumbled out into the snow barefoot before the cold slapped her back to reason. The figures stopped. One of them raised the lantern higher, and then a voice, hoarse, male, unsure. "Ma'am?" She nodded. The light caught her face, her hair in tangles, her coat dark with soot, lips cracked, cheeks red with windburn. The man stepped forward, slow, hands raised. "We saw smoke. Thought maybe wolves," Clara said. The word came out as breath, barely a sound. The man stiffened. "Where?" he asked. She turned, pointed to the tree line. 5, maybe more. Scarred one leads them. Big. They've been circling since last night." The man nodded, looked back over his shoulder. Behind him, one of the other riders dropped from his horse, pulled a rifle from the saddle. Another unlatched something from the pack, jerky, wrapped tight. A bedroll. "Name's Harrow," the man with the lantern said. "We're from Larkspur Creek. Been trying to reach the ridge cabin since Wednesday. Wolves drove us off once already." He looked past her, toward the door. "Any others inside?" "My children, and a body," Harrow nodded like that was ordinary. She stepped aside. Let them in. The warmth hit them like a wall. Not much, just a ghost of heat from the banked coals, but enough to make them blink and lower their weapons. Samuel stood, pale and unblinking, clutching the poker. Anna sat wrapped in both blankets, not crying, just watching, always watching. One of the riders, an older woman, hard-eyed with silver in her braid, crouched beside Anna and pulled out a crust of bread. Anna didn't take it. Clara finally spoke again. You saw them? Twice, Harrow said. Back along the basin trail. Lost a mule. Never heard it scream. Just gone between one bend and the next. Prints bigger than my boot. We turned back. Spent a night in a ravine. Then followed your smoke when the wind shifted. They'll be back, Clara said. They don't leave. Not for long. Harrow nodded again. Looked out the window. We'll hold. They did. The next 2 nights passed in a blur of cold, silence, and firelight. The newcomers had more than Clara could have hoped. Dried meat, bullets, stories. They patched the walls, braced the rear, dug out the snow from the collapsed roof corner. Harrow set traps just beyond the tree line. The silver-haired woman, her name was Ruth, taught Samuel how to notch the door plank and slide it shut without making noise. Anna finally took the bread, ate it in tiny bites, watching the flames the whole time. But the wolves didn't come back. Not yet. Not until the 3rd night. They came at dusk. Not howling, not running. Just shadows moving through trees, testing the edge of firelight, waiting. Clara was the first to see them. She said nothing at first, just stared out the slit in the plank wall and watched the grey shape move between snow piles. Then she whispered, "Scar's back." The others moved slow, picked up their weapons, doused the lanterns. No one breathed for a long time. Then came the sound, a scrape, long, low, like claws across a log. Then another, then silence again. Harrow raised his rifle. "Wait," Ruth said, and then a sound none of them had heard before. A cry, not human, not quite animal, high-pitched, wrong. Anna pressed her face into Clara's arm. Samuel moved closer to Ruth. "They're baiting," Ruth said, "trying to draw us out." Harrow hesitated. "That's a child's cry." "No, it's not." Another scream, closer. A man named Boyd, one of Harrow's, stood up. "I can't sit here while—" Clara grabbed his arm. "No one's out there," she said. "They make the sound. They learn. They know what makes us weak." Boyd stared at her, eyes wide, then sat down. The night dragged. The wolves didn't charge, didn't retreat, just circled. But the fire held, the walls held, and by dawn, they were gone. Clara stepped outside into the grey morning, her coat wrapped tight, boots laced with twine where the leather had torn. Harrow followed. So did Ruth. They found the prints, dozens of them, around the cabin, near the sled, even across the packed snow where the mules had been tied. But none broken in, none too close. A test, that was all. Clara stood silent for a long time, then turned. "We need to leave, today." "No argument," Harrow said. They packed what they could. Left the body buried under snow and stone, marked it with a stick and a torn piece of red cloth. The wolves didn't follow that day, or the next. By the time they reached the edge of Larkspur Creek, the storm had broken. Sunlight cut through thin clouds. The wind turned soft. Smoke rose from the chimneys of the town. People stared as they entered. No one asked questions, but word spread fast about the woman who walked out of the hills with 2 children and a fire poker, leading men who'd once fled in fear. They asked where she'd come from. She said, "A shelter my husband built." No one believed in it, not even me. Then they asked how she'd survived, and she looked down at Anna, then at Samuel, then at the sky. "Because we didn't run," she said. "We just dug deep and waited." The wolves didn't come back that year, not to town, not to the shack, but some said they still circled the ridge when the wind blew just right. And every now and then, someone riding too late into the dusk swore they heard a child's cry out in the trees. Clara never returned to the old shelter. She built a new one, deeper, stronger. Hidden beneath a barn she thatched with snowgrass and packed earth. People called it foolish, called her paranoid. Some even laughed. But the next time the wind howled and the freeze set in, her doors stayed shut, her roof stayed still, and not a single child in her house ever heard knocking on the wall again.